You're watching the WKRG News 5 Hurricane Special.
Welcome everyone to the 2021 WKRG News 5 Hurricane Special. I'm Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth. On behalf of the First Alert Storm Team, we thank you for joining us. It is expected to be another busy year in the tropical Atlantic. NOAA is predicting 13 to 20 named storms this year, with 6 to 10 of those storms becoming hurricanes, and 3 to 5 of those becoming major hurricanes. Now, this falls in line with an earlier prediction from the meteorologist at Colorado State University. So bottom line, prepare for another busy year. But first, let's take you back to this time last year. The country was in the midst of a nationwide shutdown thanks to the coronavirus pandemic. Our year already upended. But little did we know that Mother Nature would bring a hurricane season unlike any other. 30 named storms across the country, breaking the previous record of 28 back in 2005. The first storm of the season, Arthur, formed on May 16th. This marked the 6th consecutive hurricane season with a named storm forming prior to June 1st. The first storm to strike the Gulf Coast was Tropical Storm Cristobal. The storm made landfall on June 7th in southeast Louisiana, but the lopsided nature of the storm resulted in the most significant impacts being felt along the Mississippi, Alabama, and northwest Florida coast. The storm would leave behind over $600 million worth of damage, but that was just a warm-up act. The first hurricane of the season was Hannah. The storm rapidly strengthened, nearly reaching Category 2 status before coming ashore on Padre Island, Texas on June 25th. Hannah's storm surge, powerful winds, and torrential rain caused nearly $100 million in damage. The most powerful storm to make landfall in the U.S. in 2020 was Hurricane Laura. After rapidly intensifying in the Gulf to a powerful Category 4 hurricane, Laura came ashore at Cameron, Louisiana on August 27th around 1 o'clock in the morning, packing sustained winds of 150 miles per hour.
It's been a very loud morning here in Lake Charles at the Golden Nugget.
It was one of the strongest hurricanes to ever make landfall in the state. Laura's storm surge exceeded 17 feet, lifting homes off their foundations. The high winds battered the city of Lake Charles for several hours. In the end, Laura was blamed for 42 deaths in the U.S. and caused over $19 billion in damage.
Seeing quite a bit of damage here from Hurricane Laura.
On September 11th, Tropical Depression 19 formed over the Bahamas. After crossing South Florida and entering the Gulf of Mexico, the depression became Sally, a storm that would live in Gulf Coast infamy. Sally became a hurricane on September 14th and began a move to the Alabama coast. The storm crawled ashore the morning of September 16th, packing winds of 110 miles per hour.
Right now I'm in the eye wall of Sally.
Sally will be remembered for its significant water impacts. The storm dropped anywhere from 15 to 30 inches of rain over the Gulf Coast and produced a top 5 storm surge event at Pensacola, measuring at over 6.5 feet. Sally is blamed for 8 deaths and damages exceeding $7 billion.
Sally was serious down here, guys. It's a mess.
For only the second time ever, the original list of Atlantic storm names would be exhausted, pushing us into the Greek alphabet. 6 weeks after Hurricane Laura struck Louisiana, the same area would be struck by another storm. On October 9th, Category 2 Hurricane Delta made landfall in Creole, Louisiana, less than 10 miles from where Laura came ashore.
Conditions here in Lake Charles, Louisiana starting to go downhill.
Delta was blamed for 4 deaths in the U.S. Our part of the coast would again be struck by a late season storm. Zeta became a major hurricane before plowing ashore at Cocodrie, Louisiana on October 28th. The storm brought a 3 to 6 foot storm surge into the coast and into Mobile Bay. Zeta's eye wall passed through Greene County in Mississippi and Washington and Clark counties in Alabama. This produced widespread tree damage and a significant loss of power. At least 5 fatalities would be attributed to the storm, including 1 in Clark County. total of 30 named storms formed in 2020, making it the most active season on record. 9 of those storms made landfall on the Gulf Coast. One group that has been monitoring hurricanes far longer than any meteorologist on television today, the National Hurricane Center. For nearly 7 decades, the NHC has been responsible for tracking and predicting tropical weather systems in our region. Meteorologist Thomas Gieboy talked with their director about the biggest dangers we face in hurricane season.
We've had active hurricane seasons in the past, but the 2020 season brought a record number of named storms at 30. The only other season to come close to this number in the last 30 years was 2005. I spoke to the director of the National Hurricane Center, Ken Graham, about some of the surprises and challenges the 2020 season presented when it came to forecasting and messaging. What elements of 2020 surprised you the most?
You know, I think a collision course with a record-breaking season, 30 named storms in a pandemic. Once again, you look back at the individual storms, just the sheer number of storms was just absolutely shocking, and they're all so different.
Not only were the number of storms significant, but so were the impacts. As expected, the major hurricanes had major effects, but even storms that weren't major at landfall like Delta and of course Sally felt like major hurricanes.
We still have the scale because when you have systems that are increasing in strength, there's still some goodness there. We are concentrating so much on those impacts. We have the key messages product, and we talk about storm surge values. We have inundation mapping. We have storm surge watch and warning. That was in response to storm surge being the leading cause of fatalities, but it also is in response to it could be outside the cone, and it really needs to focus on these life-threatening impacts.
As Director Graham mentioned, it's about the impacts. The way we rate storms is based off the Saffir-Simpson wind scale you see here. The stronger the winds, the higher the category the storm is. What this scale doesn't tell us, though, is the water impacts. Storm surge and rainfall flooding historically are by far the deadliest aspect of storms.
And if this is gone, there's no way that this can stay stable.
90% of the fatalities in these tropical systems is water. Wind is dangerous. Wind can be deadly if you know trees falling, you have structural damage. It can absolutely be like that. But historically, it's the water that kills, and that's why we're focusing so much on the water messaging.
This past season was a reminder not to take any storm for granted, regardless where it falls on the scale. We use the phrase hide from the wind but run from the water, as even tropical storms can produce prolific rainfall impacts like Harvey a few years ago and locally Danny back in 1997. I'm meteorologist Thomas Gieboy, WKRG News 5.
Last year, a big portion of the hurricane special was dedicated to keeping you safe from the storms, all while facing the threat of COVID-19. The Centers for Disease Control has released different guidelines when it comes to the pandemic and this year's hurricane season. The CDC says get a COVID-19 vaccination as soon as you can, if you can. Give yourself more time than usual to prepare your emergency food, water, and medical supplies, and opt for home delivery if possible. For your to-go kits, pack hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, and multiple clean masks for everyone aged 2 or older. Here are some changes to local shelters. Mobile County EMA says for the 2021 season, temperature checks will still be required before entry. Testing will be offered for anyone symptomatic or stating they have had a potential exposure. Shelter capacity will be increased based off 3-foot spacing. Masks will still be required at all general population shelters to ensure safety. Mobile EMA says the previous rules for sheltering still apply. Pets will not be allowed except at the shelter designated for them. Alcoholic beverages, illegal drugs of any type, and any type of weapon or food other than special dietary requirements will not be allowed. Be careful on the water this year. More than the normal dangers are lurking beneath the surface. We will take you to Baldwin County, where the aftermath of the 2020 season is still being washed ashore and cleaned up.
We pre-stage commodities and supplies, so things like fuel, generators, water, meals, cots and tarps.
A look at how FEMA is preparing to respond to the Gulf Coast after last year's big toll on supplies, and an update on where FEMA stands in cleaning up last year's mess.
Dealing with insurance companies after a storm can be such a hassle, but that hassle can be lessened if you have all the information you need. So get an insurance check before hurricane season starts. You should schedule a phone, virtual, or in-person meeting with your home insurance agent. During this meeting, you should make sure you know what your policy covers and what it does not. This will be important if your home suffers significant damage. You should get paper and electronic copies of your policy, including contact information, and store them in a safe place. If you are buying a home for the first time here along the Gulf Coast, you should find out if you live in a flood zone and what zone you are in. Having this information can really get the ball rolling should you need to deal with your insurance agent after the storm.
Your station was the only one who gave reliable live streaming.
This is the WKRG News 5 Hurricane Special.
Welcome back. As we start another hurricane season, folks along our part of the Gulf Coast are still dealing with the last one. Tons of boats, piers, and just about everything else ended up in the waterways of Orange Beach. WKRG News 5's Debbie Williams shows us how far they've come and how far they still have to go.
It's been a monumental task keeping the waterways clear after Hurricane Sally. A quick boat ride around the back bays and you can see there's still a lot of work to be done. Not many in Orange Beach will soon forget the damage caused during last year's hurricane season.
Nothing like this.
8 months after Hurricane Sally, recovery continues. A lot of it on the water and under it.
And they're looking for anything from litter to marine debris.
It's right there.
That can be something as large as portions of a vessel, to just litter wrappers off of candy or straws or whatever it may be.
Mainly small items now, but that hasn't always been the case.
We find everything on. We find shopping carts, bowling balls, parachutes, you name it. Those are just some examples of things we pull up off the bottom out there.
Along the shoreline, almost everywhere you look, skeletons of what once was, before Sally.
We still got a lot of work to do.
90% or more of the marine structures were damaged or destroyed. A lot of that debris pulled from the waters of Terry Cove and Cotton Bayou. More is still down there.
Anytime you have the amount of damage we had in Sally or a storm like that, you're always going to have quite a bit of submerged marine debris or submerged structures of some type. And again, whether that be a vessel or portions of a pier.
The bigger targets still in the water are too deep to get to for now, but a new barge and crane will be in operation soon. In the meantime, boaters and swimmers should be aware of what's on the water and what could still be beneath the surface. In Orange Beach, Debbie Williams, WKRG News 5.
With a record hurricane season, a lot of us got used to hearing the word FEMA in 2020. And joining us now to talk a little bit more about FEMA's response to 2020 and what we can expect in the upcoming year is Manny J. Toro, the director of FEMA Region 4 and the response division there. Manny, thank you for talking with us for a few minutes. Just talk a little bit about what you all at FEMA experienced last year with the record storms. Of course, I know you respond to many disasters, but specifically here in the Southeast, your region that you cover certainly had a lot to deal with.
No, absolutely, Ed. For the first time in this agency's history, FEMA responded to simultaneous disasters in all 50 states, 5 territories, and Washington, D.C. In 2020, Alabama alone had 2 emergency declarations and 6 major disaster declarations to respond to.
There are a lot of things on your website and seem to be a lot of resources. And so as folks here on the Gulf Coast start to prepare and put together their kits and things of that nature, there are some things I think, if that does happen where we get another major storm to affect the Gulf Coast, there are some things that can be done ahead of time in preparation for the time when someone may need to reach out to FEMA. What are some of those things they can do?
Everybody has a role in preparing for hurricanes. Individuals, families, businesses who are better prepared for the next disaster make our communities more resilient. It's important to understand your risk and plan accordingly. Review your county's evacuation and shelter plans for any changes so you'll be prepared before a storm even threatens. FEMA coordinates resources from the full federal family to meet shortfalls. And this includes pre-positioning life safety, life-sustaining teams and resources that can be deployed to areas where they're needed in advance and following the storm. We pre-stage commodities and supplies, so things like fuel, generators, water, meals, cots and tarps. Those are just to name a few things that we fulfill requests from the affected states and communities. Families need to really look into consolidating and securing important documents and information so they can focus on personal safety and not worry about gathering all of those documents at the last minute. So ready.gov has information online for individuals, families, children on how to prepare for the 2021 hurricane season during a pandemic. There's another resource in the FEMA app. So folks can download the FEMA app and sign up for local community alerts.
What's the overall message from FEMA heading into this year, considering how last year unfolded? What's your message to the folks in the Gulf Coast and your region?
There are so many resources out there that are available to individuals, whether at the local, state, or federal level. Take advantage of those resources, take advantage of the guidance and the guidelines that are out there. Educate yourselves, and you will be better prepared for the season.
Manny J. Toro, the director of FEMA Region 4 Response Division, thank you for spending a few minutes talking with us, and we wish you and your folks there at FEMA a safe hurricane season.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ed.
We are getting more and more emails from FEMA about money being sent to our area for reimbursement payments. Some of the latest news out of Northwest Florida. FEMA approved construction for Bayview Park Piers to start this summer. Repairs are already underway for the Roger Scott Tennis Center. The city's still waiting on approval for several other locations, including the Community Maritime Park, Osceola Golf Course, and Clubhouse, Sanders Beach Piers, and boardwalks. Again, these are city projects. Residents can keep up with the progress on the City of Pensacola website. And going back 2 seasons, FEMA is still sending money for Hurricane Michael rebuilding. FEMA has approved 2 grants totaling more than $2.27 million to pay back emergency services such as inspections to the power system, debris removal, generator rentals, and positioning of their fuel for power crews in Northwest Florida. In Alabama, Baldwin County has been getting some help lately. FEMA, local and state authorities work together to pull approximately $200 million in reimbursements, $9.7 million going for Fairhope debris removal after Hurricane Sally. FEMA approved $6.6 million for Orange Beach debris removal and $21.7 million for other areas in the county.
It just doesn't get any more intense than that. Lots of lightning, lots of wind shear.
Flying through a major hurricane, 2 brave groups of hurricane hunters take that call. We go on board to show you how it's done.
Hurricanes can produce catastrophic property damage. Prior to a storm's arrival, there are steps you can take to limit home damage. Here are some of the things you should do before a storm approaches. Be sure to cover all windows with wood or shutters and secure all doors of your homes. Tree damage can be significant. It is a good idea to keep your trees trimmed to prevent them from coming down during a hurricane. A hurricane's ferocious winds can lift some yard items into the air, creating dangerous projectiles. All loose items need to be anchored and secured. Finally, you should protect your vehicle by moving it to a safe location. Limit the damage to yours and your neighbor's property.
Hurricane fatigue. That is something we are talking a lot about this year. The constant threat of natural disasters and staying prepared is leaving a mark on relief efforts, volunteer services, and even the weather industry. Meteorologist Caroline Carithers shows us how the brave hurricane hunters are staying up to the task of flying into these dangerous storms to provide life-saving information.
Now, there are actually two types of hurricane hunters. While they both fly into storms, the Air Force hurricane hunters focus on providing real-time observations and precise storm locations to forecasters. While the NOAA hurricane hunters also help with this, they collect data with their tail Doppler radar along with high-altitude surveillance flights and research missions. I spoke with both types, and when asked how they would describe last year's hurricane season, they both used the words nonstop and busy.
I think if we could sum it up in 2 words, it would be hurricane fatigue.
And not just one flight in November, 24-hour ops going like it was still the peak of the season.
Each storm is different, which means each flight is different. Captain Smithy says that last year, Hurricane Laura was one of the most intense storms he flew into.
You had a rapidly intensifying Category 4, nearing Category 5 strength, interacting with land. It just doesn't get any more intense than that. Lots of lightning, lots of wind shear.
They actually flew through the eye wall of Hurricane Laura 12 times in 3 hours in order to get the Hurricane Center as much data as possible. This is 3 times the normal amount. Ashley says that a few storms come to mind as the most intense: Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Delta, and Hurricane Sally.
It's those storms that are rapidly changing intensification, may it be strengthening or weakening, that you have the most turbulent rides.
In 2019, the NOAA hurricane hunters flew 280.5 hours over 39 missions, while the Air Force hurricane hunters flew 589 hours over 73 missions. Now in 2020, they almost doubled this, with NOAA flying 586.9 hours over 77 missions, and the Air Force flying 1,159.8 hours over 146 missions. The hurricane hunters do not get much of an off-season since they fly into winter storms as well, but they're always training.
Standard training flights. We're flying out over the Gulf of Mexico. We're staying current in our storm checklists. Or each crew member would be practicing their various roles in the storm environment.
But no matter how busy a season is forecast to be, both sets of hurricane hunters train the same year to year, preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. Meteorologist Caroline Carithers, WKRG News 5.
Two storms with two completely different personalities. Coming up, we'll talk you through the differences between Hurricane Sally and Zeta.
A place that years ago been voted the most beautiful place was like a war zone.
The impact, devastating. The recovery effort, long. Coming up, we take you to Lake Charles, Louisiana to take a look at life 9 months after Laura.
And we absolutely will come back, and we'll come back better as we always do.
You're watching the WKRG News 5 Hurricane Special.
Welcome back to the WKRG News 5 Hurricane Special. We're glad you're with us. It is expected to be another busy season with up to 20 named storms. Let's look back at 2 storms from last year. Meteorologist John Nodar takes a look at the differences between storms like Sally and Zeta and how to prepare for them.
Every hurricane has its own distinct characteristics, its own personality, so to speak, and that was made clear in the 2 most destructive storms to visit our stretch of the Gulf Coast in 2020, Hurricane Sally and Hurricane Zeta. Sally was a Category 2 hurricane when it made landfall in Gulf shores in the early morning hours of September 16th. Forward speed was 3 miles per hour, and slowness made everything bad about Sally even worse. Forecasting landfall was tricky. Notice the wide forecast cone.
I want to emphasize the window, 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. I know it's a long window, but there's a lot of uncertainty in this speed of Sally.
Tropical storm and hurricane force winds, storm surge, and torrential rain lasted for days. When it was over, Sally had dumped 15 to 30 inches of rain over Baldwin County and the Florida Panhandle. River and flash flooding submerged hundreds of roads.
Yeah, well, I'm still following several roads that are closed due to flooding.
The saturated ground made it easier to knock over trees.
Trees down seem to be the name of the game here in Mobile.
And Sally did that by the thousands, with wind gusts recorded up to 121 miles per hour. One of those trees narrowly missed Julie Taylor in Bell Forest.
You could hear trees popping all over the neighborhood, snapping, and then that's when Big Bertha went down. And luckily it ended up falling on the end of the house where we weren't.
Prolonged storm surge of anywhere from 3 to 9 feet combined with the torrential rain to flood homes and businesses east of Mobile Bay. So, if Sally was a snail, okay, a deadly, destructive snail crawling along at 3 miles an hour, then by contrast, Zeta was a windy 24-mile-an-hour rocket. Zeta was recently upgraded to a Category 3 storm. Landfall was October 28th in Louisiana, but most of the impacts were felt in Mississippi and Alabama. Its speedy forward movement, 24 miles per hour at landfall, meant it was easier to forecast, but
so much faster moving storm here, but unfortunately with a faster moving storm, those higher wind gusts spread further inland.
80 to 100 mile per hour wind gusts knocked down trees and power lines and damaged homes and businesses in places that usually don't directly experience a hurricane, like Greene County, Mississippi, and Washington and Clark counties in Alabama. 100% of homes in Clark County lost power.
I'm talking about winds sustaining around 85 miles per hour over the next few hours.
At the coastline, storm surge of 2 to 7 feet produced damage from Mobile Bay westward across Dauphin Island, South Mobile County, and the Mississippi coast. Sally and Zeta couldn't be more different. One thing they have in common, though, is that a lot of people in the News 5 neighborhood are still dealing with the aftermath of one or both storms as we start a new hurricane season.
Nine months ago, Hurricane Laura made landfall in southwest Louisiana. WKRG News 5 had crews in the area as the storm raced through the region. But what we found the next day was destruction as far as the eye could see. Meteorologist Colleen Peterson made the trip back to Lake Charles to see where the community stands today.
Hurricane Laura was the strongest hurricane to ever strike southwest Louisiana in recorded history.
Hurricane Laura made landfall at Cameron, Louisiana on August 27, 2020 with destructive winds of 150 miles per hour.
It's like a war zone, you know, it's like a bomb went off in the city and just destroyed every street that you remember.
A record-breaking wind speed of 133 miles per hour struck the city, leaving behind life-altering damage. Roofs torn as the northeast of the eye wall passed over Lake Charles.
This is my home. I mean, this is... I'm sorry.
Some of them you can't, there ain't nothing there but the slab, and that's usually broke.
Driving into town 9 months later, it was like the hurricane just hit yesterday.
I was not prepared for what I saw. A place that had years ago been voted the most beautiful place was like a war zone.
Patrice Norman was just settling into her apartment with her son when they heard they were in the center of the cone of Laura.
He, in his gut, felt, yeah, it's time for us to leave. This is going to be bad. And so we both were afraid. We didn't know what to expect.
Just 24 hours out, they made the decision to evacuate. The Red Cross took them under their wings.
We're providing shelter, we're providing food, we're getting you somewhere safe, and we're seeing to your immediate needs.
Arriving back into the city, Patrice couldn't believe her own eyes.
It's just anything you can imagine. It makes your heart so full to think that people can be hurting so bad because of this kind of loss.
Their place was demolished to a point where they weren't even allowed access back inside to recover any items. The Red Cross housed them for 3 months. FEMA then took over.
Let me show you inside.
How long have you been living here?
We moved in November last year.
She showed me around her FEMA trailer.
This is our living area, our kitchen area. This is our dining area. We spend a lot of time here. This is where I write my son's letters.
A place where she is able to start off fresh with the most positive outlook on what's to come.
To finally being in a space where we can start to think about what we're going to do next.
9 months later, many homes are still dealing with exposed roofs, like this one right here. Contractors and materials are still hard to come by.
It's bad to find workers and materials and things you need to fix your house.
Not far from Patrice, Chad Monroe, a local photographer, still has a long list of fixes.
I mean, the storm was like the perfect storm in a sense because it hit during the pandemic. Supplies were already shortened. Now you've got a rush on materials, products, goods, and services.
His house was built in 1908. Laura blew out the windows on the east side of the house, causing water damage. The authentic wood floors was spared.
I felt lucky because, yeah, I had damage, but man, it wasn't like near as bad as some of the others.
Chad captured what Lake Charles looked like the day after the storm hit. Streets blocked by power lines, debris, and trees. Most homes saw damage, some catastrophic. Many homes may still be standing, but damaged from the inside out. Lake Charles still resembles a blue sea of tarps with a long recovery ahead.
Reporting in Lake Charles, Louisiana, I'm meteorologist Colleen Peterson with WKRG News 5.
You know, it really is a message of preparedness, of trying to get people to get flood insurance. I'm always amazed at how many people here don't have it.
8 states of emergency declared in Louisiana, how a record year meant record floods, and how meteorologists across the region are driving home the message to be extra prepared this year.
Putting together a disaster supply kit is an essential part of hurricane season preparation. It contains items you and your family may need to survive in the days after a storm. Here are some things that you should have in your kit. Make sure you have at least a 3-day supply of non-perishable food and plenty of water. Plan on having 1 gallon per person per day for drinking and sanitation needs. Make sure that your car has plenty of gas before fuel situations begin to run low. Consider a ready-made first aid kit, including all your medications and prescriptions. Other items that you should include are batteries, flashlights, phone chargers, and a battery-powered radio. Having a well-stocked disaster kit adds an extra sense of security for you and your family in case a storm strikes the Gulf Coast.
A family hurricane plan should be documented and made readily available to the entire household. Writing down important information reduces the stress that can arise after a storm passes. Your written plan should include a number of things. Make a contact list and keep it updated every year. This includes phone numbers of family members, friends, doctors, and veterinarians. At least one of those important contacts should be someone that lives outside of the area impacted by the storm. The written plan should include paper copies of those important documents. Finally, don't keep your plan a secret. Share it with your friends and family members. This helps to ensure everyone is on the same page after a storm passes. Joining us now is WGNO's chief meteorologist, Hank Allen, down in New Orleans. Hank, thanks for spending a couple minutes just to kind of, toss some ideas around you here about what happened last season. Obviously, a record season in terms of just the number of storms, but of course your state in particular was seemed to get the brunt of the activity. Just give us your overall impressions of what it was like covering 30 named storms in the Atlantic last season.
Well, I mean, as you know, it was certainly very busy, very active, and a lot of long shifts, a lot of 12-hour shifts, that's for sure for us personally. But, you know, from a state standpoint, I mean, it was just a crazy season to go through with so many of these storms, at least at some point, you know, looking like they were going to make landfall in Louisiana. And of course, several did, and several more did not, and sort of turned away the last minute there. But I mean, in general, obviously that was a record-setting season. You hope to not have to go through something like that again. As we know, it only takes one to make a bad season, but you certainly don't expect multiple storms to hit along the coastline every year. That year it panned out, and we're happy to be past it, that's for sure.
With all the effects that a tropical system can bring, the wind, surge, and rain, I think every single storm had its own unique personality. That's why I generally don't like to compare storm to storm. But I mean, you look at Sally versus Zeta versus Laura. It seemed that the worst aspects of every single of what a storm can bring, we saw a little bit of that translate over the Gulf Coast last year.
Yeah, it was a weird setup. I mean, Sally, you certainly had some more of that storm surge over there along the coast. As you know, you had Zeta moving in here with just tremendous winds coming through. Laura, I mean, we all know the impacts of that too, but again, mainly wind-driven in the western part of the state. So I guess if there's a silver lining to any of these here, especially along the Louisiana coast, is that we did not have that tremendous storm surge event. And as we know, that's really what causes the most damage most of the time and the most loss of life.
Now, looking ahead to this season, something that we've actually talked about internally here amongst our staff is the amount of just fatigue amongst the people coming out of last year, going into this year, not just from a busy tropical season, but of course from the pandemic and whatnot. Is that something that concerns you a little bit in terms of folks preparing and making sure everything is ready to go, again, in case we have another storm that starts to approach this year?
I definitely think there's part of that. I will say that everybody here is very mindful that hurricane season is starting. I'm seeing a lot of comments on Twitter. It's like, oh, I can't believe we have to do this again. So there's definitely fatigue, but there's also awareness, which is good. We hate to get a prediction of low numbers because I think it sometimes gives people a false sense of security and then they maybe don't prepare. You also hate the above average predictions because everybody has anxiety still here left over from Katrina. I mean, it's just the way it is. That's what people still think about. And certainly last season didn't help. So, it really is a message of preparedness, of trying to get people to get flood insurance. I'm always amazed at how many people here don't have it, believe it or not, with all the water around and, just how easy it is to flood. So that's my main message most of the time. Get the flood insurance, have some supplies on hand as always. I mean, it's the message we all put out there, but you just got to keep hitting it, I guess, as much as you can.
Well, Hank Allen there from WGNO in New Orleans. I appreciate your time today, and hopefully we get a little bit more sleep this year.
Oh, man, I hope so. Same to you. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks.
Communities more than 30 miles inland from the coast felt the impact from the 2020 season. We'll check in with Clark County Emergency Management as they continue to pick up the pieces.
What we're going to be doing is moving back to congregate sheltering, the traditional Red Cross sheltering. We have the big room with everybody in there. But what we are going to do is have everybody masked up.
The Red Cross was there through every storm in 2020. We catch up with what they need going into this season and the big changes with COVID-19 and their disaster response.
We look out for each other, and we're going to rebound from this.
This is the WKRG News 5 Hurricane Special.
Let's travel north on Highway 43. Hurricanes and tornadoes, no stranger to the folks in Clark County. Sally and Zeta wreaked havoc last year. And already in 2021, the severe weather season left swaths of damage. WKRG News 5's Blake Brown talked with EMA leaders in the county about what the residents are still dealing with as the hurricane season begins.
It's not uncommon to feel the effects of a hurricane in Clark County, but in 2020, the impacts were extreme, bringing over 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts to an area far away from the coast.
Many power poles and
power lines were down throughout the county. Almost all the roads were blocked in the county at one point, even U.S. Highway 84 and Highway 43.
Roy Waite with Clark County's Emergency Management Agency remembers Hurricane Zeta as the one that hit his area hard last year. The warnings were there, but the storm's forward motion and rapid intensification sent the powerful system barreling through rural communities, damaging over 900 homes, leveling nearly 30, and ultimately Hurricane Zeta blamed for one death in the county.
If they're going slower, we typically see more rainfall. If the forward speed is 25, 30 miles an hour as it was in this storm, that allows those stronger winds to go further inland, and that's what we saw with this storm.
It's an area that's seen its fair share of storms in the last 12 months. Looking ahead, Waite believes the county is ready and prepared for what this year's hurricane season could bring, but some residents are still left vulnerable following Sally and Zeta, and that's a concern.
Because of the price of lumber at this point, there are a lot of homes that have been unable to finish their repairs.
The EMA office will also be looking at better ways to shelter residents if a storm does head their way. In Clark County, I'm Blake Brown, WKRG News 5.
We're joined now by Mike Brown, the Executive Director of the South Alabama chapter of the American Red Cross. Mike, always good to talk to you as we now enter into another, what will likely be a busy hurricane season. But of course, last year, the record hurricane season we had, plus a lot of other issues, including a global pandemic. Give me your impressions of kind of what unfolded looking back on 2020, and was it a bit more of a challenging year for the American Red Cross?
It really was. 2020 was quite a year. When COVID hit, we knew that we were going to have to continue to provide our services, which we did. We just had to adjust the way we provided them. And immediately after COVID hit, we had those tornadoes last spring. It was a big challenge hurricane season. We were hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, and it was almost the worst. We finally got hit down here in our chapter. And what we did was continue to provide our services. We have 500 workers here in South Alabama to provide our services. We served tens of thousands of meals. We sheltered folks while all at the same time keeping everybody safe with our COVID-19 precautions.
And that leads me into now that more Americans are getting vaccinated and we seem to be on the road of hopefully putting this pandemic behind us. Are you all already having some discussions about maybe relaxing some of your COVID protocols as we move into this upcoming season and through the rest of 2021?
We actually are. I'm in the office right now with no mask on. That started last Friday. And on disaster assignment, I spoke of non-congregate shelter. What we're going to be doing is moving back to congregate sheltering, the traditional Red Cross sheltering. We have the big room with everybody in there. But what we are going to do is have everybody masked up. We'll still have the medical screening table there because we want to keep everybody safe. So even though we're moving back to congregate sheltering, we're keeping some of those protocols in place to keep everybody safe.
When you see that a storm is likely to be hitting one of our states, Alabama, Mississippi, Northwest Florida, or somewhere on the Gulf Coast, you all are preparing well ahead of time prior to a storm's landfall. What kind of things are you all strategizing and discussing in those preparation meetings?
We all, keep an eye on the sky. We all talk and we prepare year round for this. Red Cross prepares 365 days a year for hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, everything but volcano can affect us here. So we prepare for everything. So we work together as a team. We keep the communication going. We keep the training. We recruit volunteers. We train volunteers and get those volunteers engaged. And if something happens on the coast or wherever it happens, we deploy. But during hurricane season, we all stick together down here.
And you just mentioned the volunteers. You can always use more volunteers. I don't think there's such a thing as too many volunteers with your organization and the funds as well. What's the easiest way for folks to help out the American Red Cross in the South Alabama chapter?
Go to redcross.org and you can click on volunteer, and it'll lay out all the options you have for volunteering for the Red Cross, and there are many. As far as donations go, a financial donation is best, and I'll tell you why. Every client is different, every family's different, every county's different, every state's different. They have different needs when a disaster strikes. So when you donate a financial donation, that converts into the needs that they have. And I mentioned the food, I mentioned the sheltering, blankets, cots, mental health counseling, the emergency response vehicles that go to help folks. That's where it goes. That's the best way to help.
Mike Brown with the South Alabama chapter of the American Red Cross. Always good to talk to you and wish you all the best in this upcoming season.
Thanks, Ed. Same to you.
From Ivan to Opal, hurricane names stick with you as much as the memories. Next on the News 5 Hurricane Special, a look at this year's list and what big names were retired from last year.
It's a worst-case scenario. A storm is coming and you're told to evacuate. The stress can be overwhelming, so knowing what to do before an evacuation order comes can help. First, have a plan. Know if you live in an evacuation zone, and you can find that out from your county emergency management agency. If you can't leave town, know where the evacuation shelters are in your neighborhood. Major roadways can get congested, so have several evacuation routes, and of course, don't forget about your pets. Unless you live right at the coastline, chances are good you won't be asked to evacuate, but you don't want to be running around at the last minute trying to figure this stuff out.
We get that alert that something is brewing in the tropics. It churns for a few days and gets stronger, and then we name it. As we know here on the Gulf Coast, those names can stick with you forever, like Opal, Ivan, and Katrina. Let's take a look at this year's hurricane names. We already marked one name off the list. Princess Anna has come and gone. Next will be Bill, followed by Claudette and Danny. And if you were wondering about Anna's queen sister Elsa, she is slated for later this year if we make it to 5. Obviously seems to be a Frozen-centric list this year. Not too many hard to name ones on this year's list like Isaias last year, but my favorite name is Henri, the H-storm. Hopefully we don't make it too far down this list. Several names were retired last year, like Laura, Ada, and Iota. Now, surprisingly, Sally and Zeta were not among them. Another big changer this year, the Greek alphabet will no longer be used as storm names. If we go through the full list of names, we will move to a secondary list, beginning with Adria, Braylon, and Caridad.
Before you go, the one thing you need to add to your hurricane kit this year, and it can stay right in your back pocket. That is next.
One great tool to use this year, the WKRG News 5 weather app. If you do not have it yet, it is free to download for your smartphone in the App Store or on Google Play. And it has many features so you can customize the information to be exactly what you need. Thank you for spending your evening with us. And remember, no matter what unfolds this season, rest assured, the News 5 First Alert Storm Team will be with you every step of the way. We hope you have a safe hurricane season. Good night.